Alaska's state constitution states that fish be utilized, developed and maintained on the sustained yield principle. In other words, salmon protection is uniquely written into the Alaska state constitution. State groups, like the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, work hard to ensure that the salmon population remains healthy while also supporting the commercial harvest for fishermen like us. Seafood is an undeniable economic resource for Alaska. The industry directly employs 60,000 people in the state, which means there are at least 60,000 people committed to protecting the environment that is home to this industry, not to mention the thousands more who enjoy the product at home. Further, buying Alaska supports the world's last all-wild salmon run in Bristol Bay. Although Alaska is home to 47 different fish species, our fishermen focus on catching sockeye salmon, one of the 5 species of salmon. We source other seafood responsibly from fishermen peers so you can do all your seafood shopping in one spot, knowing you're making an ethical, sustainable choice. Alaska ranks 9th among seafood-producing nations in the world. 42% of the world's harvest of wild salmon and 80% of the production of high-value wild salmon species such as sockeye, king, and coho salmon come from Alaska waters. Salmon is the most valuable commercial fish managed by the state of Alaska, and Bristol Bay is Alaska's richest commercial fishery. In Bristol Bay alone, the 2018 harvest of all salmon species was approximately 43 million fish, and the value of the 2018 commercial catch topped $283 million. Bristol Bay has long been recognized as a vital contributor to Alaska's commercial fishing economy, so much so that in 1972 the Alaska legislature determined that it was in the best interest of the state to establish the Bristol Bay Fisheries Reserve. This protected Bristol Bay fisheries' long-standing and valuable commercial, subsistence, and sport fishing from oil and gas development. However, it does not protect against hard rock mining operations like Pebble. Bristol Bay hosts the world's largest commercial sockeye salmon fishery. Beginning in late May every year, salmon make the run upriver to spawn in one of the 5 rivers that feed into Bristol Bay, where we fishermen spend our time each summer. On average, 35.1 million sockeye salmon return to the rivers annually. Because of the bay's remote environment away from industrial development, and its healthy, largely untouched watershed, Bristol Bay is a vital refuge for both oceanic and freshwater fish species, including our beloved sockeye salmon. Every day, biologists count the salmon running into each river system as the salmon swim into protected spawning areas. Each commercial fisherman in Bristol Bay is constantly in contact with the biologists who are informing the fishermen whether or not they may put their nets in the water. Alaska's diligent tracking and management of the salmon population is protecting future generations of salmon to repeat the process, as well as sustaining the world's salmon consumption. All 5 species of Pacific salmon return to Bristol Bay to spawn in its rivers, including pink, chum, sockeye, coho and king. The waters of the region have long been an integral part of the state and local economies, providing thousands of sustainable jobs to Alaskans for generations. Commercial fishing-related jobs account for nearly 75% of local employment. The annual payroll for fish and wildlife-related employment totals $175 million. Commercial fishing and the associated canneries have been the major industries in the area for many decades. In 2014, residents marked the 130th anniversary of commercial fishing in Bristol Bay. The commercial fisheries management area of Bristol Bay includes 8 major river systems: Naknek, Kvichak, Agegig, Ogashik, Wood, Neshagik, Agushik and Tobiak. The Kvichak River, which runs from Lake Iliamna, the largest freshwater body in Alaska, to Bristol Bay, is home to the single largest salmon run on the planet. The Neshagik River hosts the largest king salmon run in Alaska. The annual average sockeye run is 36.9 million run for the latest 20-year time period. Bristol Bay's productive salmon runs are remarkable even by Alaska's standards and retain a strong Chinook run, while other areas of the state are seeing diminishing returns. Every year fish return to Bristol Bay in astounding numbers, largely due to the sound, scientific management of state and federal agencies. For instance, in 2018 the Bristol Bay sockeye salmon run produced a record-breaking 62.3 million fish. National Geographic listed Alaska as one of only 3 well-managed fisheries in the world, the others being Iceland and New Zealand. The forecast for 2019 season is expected to be another banner year, at rough
Usually, like, we put your sets when they're all alive, you can bleed them better.
Bristol Bay is a unique source of salmon because the run remains completely unmanipulated by humans, save for close management and commercial fishing. This stands out because other regions of Alaska support their fish habitat with hatcheries. It is important to note that salmon from the southeast are not farmed. However, in order to support the fishery, many of the rivers in other parts of Alaska release hatchery-born salmon into the rivers to support the fish population. Bristol Bay's population has remained strong enough to avoid this type of support through tight management and responsible fishing. We are proud to continue that tradition and stand down when the law says it's time to protect the salmon rather than catch them to bring them home to you. Buy direct from the fisherman. Buying seafood from the fisherman gives you confidence that your fish have been properly handled, sustainably harvested from Alaska waters, and available to you at a fair price. Buying from Alaska may not be a traditionally local choice, but did you know that some seafood caught in the US is frozen, shipped to China for processing, and then shipped back to the US? Buying from us minimizes your food miles when buying Alaska wild. We strive to source from only the best Alaska fishermen to provide you with a variety of other wild-caught salmon, whitefish, scallops, crabs, and more. When you know your fishermen, you know where your quality seafood came from. One of the more exciting summer activities in all of Bristol Bay, and possibly the whole state of Alaska, is commercial fishing for sockeye salmon. Bristol Bay is known as the sockeye salmon capital of the world. The 6 rivers, Naknek, Kvichak, Neshagik, Togiak, Ugashik and Negegik, that make up the commercial fisheries here in southwest Alaska produce more sockeye salmon, known as red salmon, than any other place in the world. It is a multifaceted industry with each aspect being totally awesome in itself. The aspect of highest priority is that of escapement, which is a predetermined number of salmon that management allows to escape the commercial fisheries. These are the salmon that reproduce to ensure the future of our great resource. In 1998, over 6 million sockeye salmon escaped up the 6 rivers that flow into Bristol Bay to reproduce. There are over 1,800 boats and over 1,000 set nets that take part in this truly spectacular industry. The salmon are processed, for the most part, by onshore-based factories called canneries, where they can, as well as freeze, the salmon. The act of commercially canning salmon on the West Coast got its start in the small town of Washington, California in 1864. That first year the firm Hapgood, Hume & Company canned 2,000 cases of sockeye salmon. As time went by, the tentacles of commercial salmon fishing stretched with alarming speed ever northward. By the late 1890s there were companies that had ventured as far north as Prince William Sound and the Kodiak Island area of Alaska. During the first 50 years of commercial salmon fishing in Bristol Bay, the fishing boats were restricted to sail power. When this restriction was finally lifted in 1951, it took only 7 short years to outfit all the boats, approximately 1,500, with diesel or gas engines. In the late 1920s another law was passed restricting the length of the boats to 32 feet. This law holds true even today. In 1974, the state of Alaska enacted perhaps the most significant restriction to date. That being, the limited entry permit system, which restricts the number of commercial fishing permits allowed to harvest salmon in the 6 river system here in Bristol Bay. There have been years in the recent past where the total run of sockeye salmon in Bristol Bay has exceeded 60 million fish. A very effective management allows over a quarter of the total run to escape up the rivers to ensure a very colorful and lucrative future. All this action happens in about 4 weeks, usually the 3rd week in June through the 3rd week in July, creating the fastest-paced commercial salmon season in the world. Commercial fishing is definitely the mainstay of our economy and a big reason why we boast of being the sockeye salmon capital. With overstuffed markets and high-volume harvests ahead, Alaska's Bristol Bay salmon industry may be nearing the bottom edge of financial solvency. In the preamble of this year's season, fishermen and processors still haven't recovered from the low prices of last year, leaving them to embrace a reality that harvest volume can't fix. As a barometer to the bay's financial health, springtime in Alaska is retro season, meaning that processors typically pay out bonuses on top of the previous year's ex-vessel base prices. These settlements go to fishermen with the highest production in terms of pounds of salmon or to all fishermen in their fleets when they've made a windfall in profits from the year's salmon pack. This year, however, retro stories have been dismal, with news of a dime per pound from only a few processors and to only a handful of fishermen whose catches comprised the extreme upper percentile in terms of production. In the world of fishing, reality spawns rumor, and the supposition of continued low prices has left fishermen and processors worried about how long they can stay afloat. In the half-century, since permits were awarded to individual fishermen, the relationship between the two has been an us and them conversation, with fishermen often suspicious that processors maintain disproportionately higher profit margins by offering meager ex-vessel prices. While it would take a lifelong investigation and argument to determine an equitable split in profits between the two sectors, current market conditions threaten the independence and the solidarity that fishermen have struggled so hard to maintain. In this latest twist of fisheries economics, fisher and processors may need to become business bedfellows to satisfy billions of dollars tied up in loans. Going into this year's season and beyond, cheap fish won't service loan payments predicated upon higher prices throughout the salmon distribution chain. The problem you have is that you're coming off this aberration of several years of huge runs and good prices, says Leela Klingit, president of the Alaska Commercial Fishing and Agriculture Bank, CFAB, in Anchorage. Klingit, whose tenure at CFAB spans 37 years, remembers loans in the 80s and 90s were limited to startup costs in the weeks before the seasons. Alaska's Bristol Bay salmon industry on the brink. As overstuffed markets and looming high-volume harvests loom, the financial solvency of the industry hangs by a thread. Justin Del Bolta photo. With overstuffed markets and high-volume harvests ahead, Alaska's Bristol Bay salmon industry may be nearing the bottom edge of financial solvency. In the preamble of this year's season, fishermen and processors still haven't recovered from the low prices of last year, leaving them to embrace a reality that harvest volume can't fix. As a barometer to the bay's financial health, springtime in Alaska is retro season, meaning that processors typically pay out bonuses on top of the previous year's ex-vessel base prices. These settlements go to fishermen with the highest production in terms of pounds of salmon or to all fishermen in their fleets when they've made a windfall in profits from the year's salmon pack. This year, however, retro stories have been dismal, with news of a dime per pound from only a few processors and to only a handful of fishermen whose catches comprised the extreme upper percentile in terms of production. In the world of fishing, reality spawns rumor, and the supposition of continued low prices has left fishermen and processors worried about how long they can stay afloat. Though the financial bottom line varies widely among fishermen, a common denominator since the inception of the limited entry program in the 1970s has been their independence from processors. Before that, fishermen contracted with processors to fish cannery-owned boats. In the half-century, since permits were awarded to individual fishermen, the relationship between the two has been an us and them conversation, with fishermen often suspicious that processors maintain disproportionately higher profit margins by offering meager ex-vessel prices. While it would take a lifelong investigation and argument to determine an equitable split in profits between the two sectors, current market conditions threaten the independence and the solidarity that fishermen have struggled so hard to maintain. In this latest twist of fisheries economics, fisher and processors may need to become business bedfellows to satisfy billions of dollars tied up. Bristol Bay is home to the largest salmon fishery in the world. All 5 North American Pacific salmon species plus rainbow trout and dolly varden use Bristol Bay tributaries near Pebble Mine for spawning. Pebble Mine proposes to extract copper molybdenum gold ore from a large deposit in the Bristol Bay watershed of Alaska. Pebble Mine plans to create a large open pit mine using earthen dam holding ponds. Concentrated mineral slurry from the mine will be piped to a port on Bristol Bay. Mine owners have applied for permits to use roughly 35 billion US gallons per year in operations. The proposed Pebble Mine is in a seismically active area with known fault lines, Alaska Aleutian Megathrust and Castle Mountain Lake Clark fault system. Accidental discharge from the mine would be released to the watershed and likely cause serious harm to the barn. Bristol Bay, Alaska produces 44% of the world's sockeye salmon supply. It supports more than 14,000 fishing jobs, centuries-old indigenous communities and hundreds of diverse species of wildlife, from bald eagles and brown bears to beluga whales. It is also a model fishery, sustainably managed by fishermen who understand that protecting this precious resource is in their long-term economic, social and environmental interests. Unfortunately, looming clouds on the horizon signal rough seas ahead for the salmon fishery in Bristol Bay. For more than a decade, mining interests have pushed for the construction of an open-pit copper and gold mine, known as Pebble Mine, in the pristine headwaters of Bristol Bay. In 2014, after years of scientific research and input from regional stakeholders, the Environmental Protection Agency used its authority under the Clean Water Act and proactively limited the development of the Pebble Mine. EPA's scientific assessment concluded that large-scale mining in the watershed would pose catastrophic risks to salmon stocks, ecosystems, indigenous cultures and wildlife. Bristol Bay. Local communities, fishermen and businesses celebrated the EPA's protection of Bristol Bay, but their victory was short-lived. Pebble Limited Partnership immediately sued the EPA, preventing the agency from finalizing the proposed mining restrictions. Then, in January 2018, after speaking with stakeholders and reviewing more than 1 million public comments, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt announced that EPA would not reverse the protections proposed in Bristol Bay. However, while Administrator Pruitt upheld EPA's conclusion that mining threatens Bristol Bay's salmon population, his announcement does not prevent Pebble Mine from moving forward as a result of EPA's settlement agreement with Pebble in 2017. As a result, the future of Bristol Bay's salmon fishery remains in limbo as Pebble's licensing process progresses. Despite all of these developments over the past year, one thing remains the same: the unprecedented alliance of Alaska Native communities, commercial fishermen, sport fishermen, seafood processors, chefs, business owners, conservationists and others work together to protect Bristol Bay's salmon fishery. From Mo Soy. In fact, these loyalties are stronger than ever, and Pebble's recent momentum has prompted the formation of a new national coalition, Businesses for Bristol Bay. Bringing together diverse companies and sectors, Business for Bristol Bay is sending a clear message to the Trump administration that the Pebble Mine threatens America's jobs, food security and economy. Hundreds of businesses participated, including Publix, Hy-Vee, Wegmans, New Seasons Market, Tom Douglas Seattle Kitchen, Ocean Beauty Seafoods, Orca Bay Seafoods, Orbis, Patagonia and Yeti. While it is difficult to know what the future holds for Bristol Bay, it is clear now that our nation has an important opportunity to protect our last major wild salmon fishery. And by saving Bristol Bay, we are saving the future of sustainable fisheries and the people, businesses and wildlife that
So what's the difference, Bill?